Okay, so we are live. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Healthy, Wealthy, and Smart Live. If you happen to be watching live, I would love for you to write down where you're watching from and who you are so that we can see it in the chat. And if you have any questions as we lead up towards the end, we'll be happy to take some questions as well. So welcome to Healthy, Wealthy, and Smart Live. And I am here with Dr. Carrie Pagliano. So welcome. And can you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. So I've been a PT since 1999, and I primarily practice in the area of women's and pelvic and pediatric health. And I recently opened, as recently as last week, I opened a practice in Arlington, Virginia. And then I'm also the new president for Section of Women's Health for the APTA. So that's kind of the work side. And then I also have two kids, 7 and 4, and an amazing husband who I can't do any of this stuff without. So that's a little bit about me.
So huge, obviously, changes and shifts in your career in the past month, I would say. And,
Yes.
you know, as everyone knows, yesterday was International Women's Day. So in honor of that, I'd like to talk a little bit about what it's like being a woman, being a mom in the workplace, owning your own business, being in a leadership position within the APTA. And just so people know, when you're in these leadership positions, it takes up time. And we'll talk a little bit about that. And it's not like it's a volunteer position.
Yeah.
You know, you are volunteering.
Labor of love.
Yes, to be part of this position. And I think that's another thing people need to remember when they look at the American Physical Therapy Association and all the people in it. The majority of them are volunteer or are volunteers that are just there to kind of make everyone's experience as a physical therapist in the United States better. So let's talk about what it's like being a mom, being a very new business owner, and being part of the leadership within the Section on Women's Health. So how do you do it? I'll just throw it over to you now.
I'm tired now that you said all that. It's funny. I was thinking about this a little bit this morning, and I think when you actually start to write it down, it does get a little bit scary, but it's kind of, this is just what normal life has become. And, you know, you don't wake up one morning in PT school and say, hey, I want to be president. I want to own my own business. I want to have kids. I want to do all this stuff. For me, it's just been kind of a natural progression. And thinking about, International Women's Day yesterday, I was talking to a friend of mine who's a PT. She does PRN work. And I said, well, you know, are you a member? And she's like, well, you know, I'm just PRN and I made a decision to do the mom thing. And I'm like, that's still kind of amazing. So we have so many ways in our profession in which women and specifically moms can choose to be a part depending on where they are in, you know, their family development and whatnot. But there's still so much that, you know, just the PRN mom PT has to offer to those newer physical therapists. And so one of the things I was really thinking about yesterday was, regardless of where we are in our career and family life cycle, we have a lot to offer. And thinking I'm just this or I'm just that, we need to own up to the fact that, you know, we still run the home. We you know, get the kids off to school, although this morning was not pretty. We get our patients taken care of. We do all these things, and it's just kind of what normal is. So taking a second yesterday and just kind of celebrating that a little bit and how amazing women are, especially in our field that's, you know, I think predominantly female. That was actually kind of special yesterday to stop and think for a second, hey, we do a lot of stuff here. So.
Yeah. And I think, you know, the word just is sort of like a nasty four letter word, the J word.
Yes.
So many women say that, well, oh, you know, I'm just PRN, or, oh, I just do this. Or I remember when people used to ask about this podcast, like, oh, I just do it on the side. And so it kind of minimizes what you do. So is that something that you used to do? Do you still do it? And do you have any advice on how to overcome that feeling of, well, I'm just?
Sure. I mean, my background, I just, here's the just again. I left working in a large hospital system, and I worked there for 10 years. I started working there prior to my kids, and actually started building a residency program while I was pregnant with my oldest. And eventually filtered into PRN and had a really strong run as PRN, and got to the point where both my kids were in school full time. And this is me literally in August. I wrote this down. I said, something has to change. And this is, I knew I was going to go into president. I knew we had closed our residency, and I'm sitting there thinking something's got to change. And it's not, I'm just doing this, I'm just doing that. It's now kind of, where can I make an impact? Where am I happy? And where do things match up? Like, where, if I want to be around for my kids, how do I make that happen? If I want to be there for my patients, how do I make that happen? And where I was sitting over the summer was a place that, if I had to call out sick for, the kids were sick and I had to stay home, I had no way to reschedule my patients. Whereas finding some flexibility now with my own practice, if my kids are sick, I can reschedule to another day. I have that control. And so that just piece of it is, yeah, it was just PRN, but I was really kind of handling a lot of things within that, a residency and building a pelvic program. And not to minimize, I think minimizing it, we do it a lot, and I think we just kind of do it offhand and don't realize it. And I've been trying to be more conscientious now, to acknowledge what we do. And when I was talking with my friend yesterday, I said, this isn't just, you do all these things, but we don't give ourselves credit at all. We're like, oh, well, this is just, what we do. No, you're baller. You're kind of doing some amazing things. So yeah, pausing and taking a second.
And just congratulating yourself for all that you do. And I remember at the Women in PT Summit last year, I think you stood up and you were like, well, I'm announcing that I'm starting my own practice. And it was amazing. So it was kind of a little emotional, along with, there was a lot of emotion that day, but it was a little emotional, you got a little choked up, but you had all that support there, and everybody was obviously like really excited. And now here you are in your office doing this.
Yeah, I'm in my office. And that's the thing too, that I think we don't give ourselves credit for either. I had started to think about doing something over the summer. The Women in PT Summit was September. And when you get to the point where you articulate it to people, then it starts to become more real. And at that point, I had no idea that this space is 3 blocks from my house. I have walked past it. We've lived in our home for 5.5 years. It wasn't even for rent. I wasn't even looking for a space. I did, some home visits initially for a side hustle. You find things when you start looking, and you find things when you're open. And it's an uncanny ability that I think women have, is making things happen. My first couple weeks doing the home care side hustle, I'm like, okay, this is great. I'm seeing patients in my neighborhood, just dropped off my kids at school. I can see somebody down the street. And then I realized, being on my knees on somebody's living room floor, and I'm almost 42. I'm in decent shape, but I was like, I'm not doing that. So you start to think, okay, something's got to be different. And so having the flexibility to say, okay, it doesn't have to be one way, and I don't know exactly how this is going to go, but the openness to be able to see opportunities that may not have been obvious before. So
yeah, so once you kind of open up your mind to those possibilities, it sounds like the space found you, the universe sort of spoke back, and the space found you. And it was always there, but you weren't ready to receive it yet. And now that you were, it was like, perfect.
Well, and that's the thing I was thinking about as well. There's so many women leaders that have come before us that, you're a fantastic example too, that saw that entrepreneurial spirit when the risk level was much higher. I mean, I've been out of school almost 20 years now, and the idea of going out on your own, it was to become like a NovaCare, become like a Health South, and I had no appetite for that kind of risk. But I knew I really wanted to be good at what I did, and you find out very quickly that in corporate and hospital practice, you hit the ceiling pretty quickly. But there were those women that were out there. I mean, locally, I'm going to name drop. I mean, Jen Chu in my area, in the DC metro area, Stephanie Coleman, they had businesses before they had kids, and they had the kahunas to do it when the risk was high. Jenny Gablesberg out in California, I'm like, I don't know how they do location clinics.
Yeah, or Michelle Colley.
Michelle Colley, she's another one in
kids,
in
and I mean,
what? Exactly. But now, I mean, I feel like there's such an upsurgence of women, and especially moms in the entrepreneurial space, because my local entrepreneurial group, it's Awesome Women Entrepreneurs in Arlington. Most of the women here decided to become an entrepreneur because their kids were in school, and they tried, basically you sit down, you're like, okay, well, what do I want to be when I grow up? And so in our space, because we have the flexibility in what we do, it can be consulting, it can be, the side hustle, it can be doing PRN. And it's not just PRN, it's like you're part of the team too. And that's what I want to encourage also friends to understand is we're an asset. We're going to be loyal. We're going to stay. And we want to contribute. So you really want to make us part of your team. I was at Georgetown for 10 years. And, if they were interested in building that program further, I still would have been there. So there's a lot that we can contribute, but there's a huge entrepreneurial spirit right now. And I think technology is also facilitating that. Online scheduling and, I can't wait for this whole telehealth thing. That I think is going to make it easier for moms to, see a couple patients while their kids are at preschool. I just feel like now's a really good time, and women are owning that space to say, hey, there's other women out there who need this from a patient side. I'm happy to be there as an advocate for them on the professional side.
And one thing I want to kind of circle back on that you had said during that talk there is that you have an entrepreneurial group that you're a part of.
Yep.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I doubt it's just all PTs.
No, it's not. I'm actually one of two. So, and this is the thing too, when you're scared about going into this, listen to every podcast that you can. And of course, all the side hustles you did, like, okay, find these other people. And I literally Googled, I don't know, women entrepreneurs, and I'm super lucky in Arlington. So AW originally was Arlington Women Entrepreneurs, and it's now branched out in the DC metro area. So they just made it Awesome Women Entrepreneurs. And we get together, and what's really nice about it is we all have similar pain points. Like everybody knows what it's like to have that first. So the first meeting I went to was even before I'd started my home business. And I said, I'm just trying to figure out what to do and to do it right. And so they would have a speaker come in, and then at the end, everybody goes around and does their 1-minute elevator pitch. I'm like, I don't have one. And hi, I'm Carrie. I'm a physical therapist. I am going to start a practice, and I have no idea what I'm doing. And like, that's my elevator pitch.
That's not a bad elevator pitch when you're in a group of entrepreneurs, because then guess what? Everybody has a hand raised to tell you how they can help you.
Yes. And that's the thing, is you start to realize that everybody's gone through it, and then you start to meet. So I have a brunch scheduled with someone who's a reporter for some major media outlets, and I found an integrated medicine physician for another referrals. And I mean, we have things that are shared, and I think, women, we do a really good job about finding our tribe and stepping out of our own profession and finding people that have similarities. I mean, that's what I do with my patients as well. I mean, doing pelvic health, in the first 2 minutes, you've got to get trust pretty quickly. And so, if they've come in postpartum and they've got diastasis, I'm going to share with them, hey, I've gone through this too. I've got 2 kids. I had diastasis. I know exactly what you're talking about. And don't be scared about telling me you do CrossFit, because guess what? I go to the CrossFit box next door. It's establishing that trust and that rapport and that tribe mentality. And there's so many different ways to do it. So I'm going to look at making like a local women PT one, because there's so many of us around here that are building that. But the attitude is not of we're competitors. The attitude is, hey, there's a lot to go around. We have a lot of similar things that we're going through. Let's try and all work through this together. And that's actually really fun.
Yeah. And now you had mentioned about you all kind of had similar pain points. Can you just tell the listeners, give maybe 2 pain points and what they were and how you worked together to solve them? Okay.
So one pain point is very recent. It's going through setting things up with local municipalities. So how do you get a certificate of occupancy? If you need a sign, did you know that you also need a commercial builder permit to hang said sign?
Even if it's just a little tiny sign?
Oh, even if it's just a little tiny sign. And that takes time. It takes at least a day. And I mean, no one in, Des Moines, Iowa is going to be able to tell me how that works in Arlington, Virginia. So having local entrepreneurs that can tell you exactly, hey, this is something that you need to do. This is how you work it. That was invaluable. I think another thing too is the pain points of how do you figure out the balance piece? And I think balance is such a funny word too. There's a lot of mom-run businesses in Arlington, and moms that have kids that are older, that are in high school, and my kids are younger, they're pre-K and first grade. And just, I think having that touch point of, I was talking to a friend of mine that her kids had my son's kindergarten teacher. So, I mean, and I think her kids were 16 now. They knew exactly what I was going through with my kids locally, and they were running a business. And so you can't really get much closer than that. So understanding, okay, well, how do you balance the demands of, a local education and making sure the kids get to the activities and do what they need, but then also balancing what you need to do to keep your company afloat and get your name out there and get the word out to moms groups and those sorts of things. So I think locally that's what they did the most, was really bring it down to ground level, because these are my neighbors, and that part's really cool, that these are my neighbors and they're kind of doing the same thing. And that's really fun.
Very cool. Yeah, I think those are some great pain points that a lot of people can relate to. And hi, everyone joining us, Alex, Jennifer. And earlier, Jennifer said, so true, I learned so much from the quote unquote, PRN moms.
Yeah.
So,
they are a treasure trove of information, let me tell you.
Exactly. So now you alluded a little bit to work-life, we'll say balance, but I think there's no such thing. I think it was Michelle Colley. Is she the one who said work-life integration or work-life? I can't remember what she said.
It was something around those terms,
at the Women in PT Summit, but it was something like that. So now that you've got your own business, you've got 2 young children, and you're the president of the section on women's health for the APTA. Now, I mean, I'm on the nominating committee for the private practice section, which is nowhere even near the amount of work that I see the private practice board doing. Yeah. So how do you feel like because this is all new. So do you have a game plan to be able to integrate this into your life and into your lifestyle?
Yeah. And I think, even when I considered running for president, I mean, I was in VP position before that. It's still different. The gravity of the situation is still quite different. I mean, for me, and it's funny, I was just thinking, well, I'm just working this many hours. No, I really work all the time.
Don't say the J word. I'm calling you out every time.
I know. No, but I knew patient care wise, and this is the thing too. You just wake up one morning and you realize these things. It's been kind of practice and coming along. When I started back to PRN practice, I was working I would work Tuesday, Thursday, and initially tried to maybe work 2 10s and work a part-time status. And that just wasn't working. It was too much. And it was, I like teaching a little bit. I like working with students. I like working with mentees. I think the first part, I guess, was just figuring out where my buckets are filled. And working with patients fills some of the buckets, but also working with my profession fills a lot of buckets. Working with students and mentees fills buckets. Being with my family fills buckets. So I knew that about myself, and that wasn't something that came up all of a sudden. That was something that I kind of realized over time. And then I think structuring my schedule based on that. So I'm still kind of figuring that piece out now. With flexibility also comes the problems of becoming too flexible. You're like, oh, I can just squeeze this person in, I can do that. And so I really have to stick to my guns of, I don't want to see a new patient right before lunch because I know it's going to spill into my lunch, and I need to get stuff done. Because when I leave the office, I can't be thinking about what's in the office. I need to be fully present for my kids. And same thing with the president stuff. I mean, we're super fortunate. We have an amazing board right now. We have an amazing new executive director that really just lets us work to our strengths. And I think if it weren't for that, I would be much more tentative about incorporating that piece. Where we've come with the section of women's health is really allowing the board to govern instead of trying to figure out how to run $1 million nonprofit, which I don't know how to do, by the way. But allowing me to use my skill set and the rest of the board to use our skill set to move our membership forward. So I guess the summary piece is really being honest with what I wanted and then making sure that this stuff fit in. And I do teaching too, by the way. I'm adjunct at Marymount University, but it's a mile down the road. My chair lives a couple blocks. A lot of the students end up becoming our babysitters. Like it's one-stop shopping for a lot of different things. So it's making sure that it serves you and serves your family and whatnot. So.
And do you recommend people to get a piece of paper out or their computer out or iPad or whatever you're using to write on these days, and actually making a list of things that are kind of most important or most meaningful, and then seeing how, because it seems like a big, broad, esoteric thing, but once you kind of put it down on paper, do you then look at that and say, well, this is how much energy and time I can put into this bucket or this bucket or this bucket, and then schedule appropriately? Or how do you work it?
I mean, earlier in my career, and again, I guess that set me up. I mean, I would love to say that I've calculated this. I'm just unfortunately not that bright, and it's been kind of a slow progression and understanding of myself. But I used to say yes to just about everything because everything sounded cool. And then the last couple of years, I've had the year of the educated no, the year of the educated yes. And then really this summer, I'm that person. I need to write stuff down. And of course, there's all these planners and stuff now, the 5-year planners of what's your purpose? I have no idea. I mean, that's kind of a big question. And I'm that person that I need to set myself up to succeed and find something that I can do. And that'll kind of help fill in the gaps till I get to the bigger question of what's my purpose. Like maybe on my deathbed, I'll figure that one out. But, I
think you can figure it out. I think if you worked through it, you would, what your purpose is as the president of the section on women's health. You just said it.
Sure. Yeah.
And that part. Yeah. And I think your purpose in overall being on the planet,
that's how I was interpreting that. I was like, that one I don't know.
Yeah. I think you're looking at what is your purpose? Opening your own business, that's part of your brand. So what is the purpose? What is your promise to your customers? And then what makes you different? How do you stand out?
Well, I think that's the part that I started to figure out. And when you start to write down, okay, what are the things that I really enjoy doing? And then you prioritize those and figure out, okay, does this fit in? And if it's one of those things where I can't live without it, I figure out how to make it fit in. So for example, self-care. being really cognizant that I am my better self with my family if I have self-care. And usually that's the first thing to fall by the wayside. So
Always.
I block out 2 hours a week for CrossFit. I have an hour for yoga. I've got to figure out when the weather gets a little more back in, but those are non-negotiables for me. So I kind of started with that, and then it's funny how those non-negotiables start to turn into things that fill up the rest of your life. So my CrossFit box happens to be on the other side of the fence from my office, so that serves me in a couple of different ways. But I think looking at what you really enjoy and what makes you have those warm fuzzies and good feelings at the end of the day, like that's the part where you want to put your time and your in. And you know, really kind of being on my own, I've really tried to reflect at the end of the day, like, is this all worth it? Because it's obviously a really steep climb in the first part. And I'm leaving smiling every day. I'm like, okay, yep, that's the right thing. That's the right thing to do. When I leave my students, it feels me invigorated to go do other stuff. Yep, that's the right thing to do. That working with our board on the section on women's health, I feel like I'm able to be a touch for, up and coming therapists and show people that, we can be involved even if we're just working that part-time job. There's a place for us, there's stuff for us to give. So until way, as long as I kind of keep it in those simple categories, it makes it doable.
That's great. And I think that's great advice for anyone listening if they're feeling a little overwhelmed or they're feeling like they're adjust. Right. It's a great way to kind of look at things. What am I good at? What do I love to do? And on the business side of it, what's someone going to pay you for? Right. Let's be honest. I mean, you got to get paid too. You have a business. So what do you love? What are you good at? What will someone be willing to pay you for? Because if you really love something and you're really good at something, it's awesome. And it can be like that self-care. Right. But if no one's going to pay you for it, then it's a hobby. Well, so and you can't expect everything you do for you to get paid for, number one. But number two, you can expect everything that you love to do and you're good at to kind of get you excited and to add to your life.
Yeah. I mean, anybody that's interested in getting more involved in their profession, I mean, I'm not going to lie. That was probably the one time it was a calculated decision where as you start to become more of a volunteer, you're not going to get paid, but that gets me to CSM. That gets me around other people that do fill my bucket up. So I think getting paid, it's got to be able to, obviously you got to get food in your kids' mouths, but it can look like a lot of different things. And getting yourself in those situations can also pay off later on too.
Absolutely.
And you can end up meeting people that open up opportunities for other things. So I think 100%. Just looking at, did I get a check, for this? It's a little short-sighted. I think if you start to be open about what that payoff looks like, then all of a sudden you've got, I think, a lot more options of things to do. So
for sure. Yeah, because like scaling a business and scaling your I guess you could say scaling your business, scaling your involvement in let's say, for example, the APTA in some way.
Right.
The return on investment may not be immediate, and scaling doesn't mean bringing in more money. Scaling can be opening up your network. Scaling can be traveling to speak somewhere or, having, like you said, other opportunities open up down the road because you never know. So I think oftentimes when people think, scaling your business, it means raising your rates, hire more people, do this, do that. Right. When in fact, a scale of a business can be, it's still just you, but now your world is open to so many other opportunities and that's scalable. Exactly.
And I think unique to where we are here, I mean, I'm probably 15 minutes from APTA headquarters. And I mean, I've lived in the DC area since '01, and probably the first time I went down there and went in the building wasn't until the last, 4 or 5 years or so. And what I've come to realize too, that's actually really amazing is of course, the people that are on staff at APTA live here. These are my neighbors that work, for this organization that's working to help my profession. And, they're happy to be your support system too. And just, you can find those support systems wherever. And my neighbors are happy to advocate for me as individuals for what I'm doing individually. So that part's actually super cool too.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're able to cultivate win-win relationships. And that's always what we're looking to do. You never want to enter in a relationship and say, well, what can this get for me? Right. You're entering in and saying, how can I help? Number one. And this is what I need help with. And this is how I can help you. Right. Yeah. So if you are talking about the APTA and the people that work at the APTA, you're going in saying, well, how can I help? What can I do to be of service to the organization? And they're saying maybe X, Y, and Z. And if you need something, we're there to give you support. Yeah. We're there to give you a referral of a patient, for God's sakes, Yeah. So I think if you can, especially as a new business owner, cultivate a win-win across with every single person you meet, basically, because you'll see when you have your own business, every person you talk to, it can be a win-win relationship. Yeah. I mean, you're setting yourself up for success.
I think so much of that, you hit the nail on the head, I think, with the, not going in with what can this person do for me? It's going in and being your authentic self, and then also getting that in exchange, and whatever comes out of that is going to have so much more value, because it's inherently who you are and what you want, and inherently who they are and what they want. And so that part, I think you really form those lovely, authentic relationships that can be really something much bigger.
Yeah. And very special as well. Hi, Howie. Yeah. Howie Barrett says hi.
Hi, Howie.
And Carrie, hello. There are so many different ways to run a business, to raise a family, to work, to teach, to do all of those things as a woman, as a mom, and as a business owner. And I think that you are setting yourself up in a really, really good position. So what advice would you have for, let's say, a student who may be coming out of school? I mean, you teach students, you have to give them advice, right? So what advice would you give to a student coming out of school if they wanted to have the family, have the business, be a volunteer, be more than they thought they might or could be?
Right. We actually get that question a lot. There were a couple of us that did a presentation at CSM last year. It was Karen Brandon, Jenny Gablesberg, Cecily DeStefano, and myself. We did a hashtag Mama Cape Mafia.
Sold out.
And it did. It literally started as a joke where, we're super moms. Sometimes we have our cape flying high. Sometimes it's trapped in the car door, and sometimes we left it at the cleaners. And I think that's reality. I think the misconception that we have this all figured out and we're on Pinterest all the time and everything is perfect. I think the sooner you drop, and I think I tell my patients, I was like, the second you conceive, like anything that you plan is kind of over, because the kid didn't read the directions. And I think when you choose to be a mom, that's the case. You kind of have to be flexible and run with it. And if you choose that's, that the path that you want to go down, I think the thing to remember is you're a mom, you're not dead. And things don't have to end. It may look
life doesn't
different.
Stop?
No, sadly not. No, it's going to change. It's going to look different. And we say that about kids too. When babies are little and they're not, and in my reality, my son didn't sleep the first 5 years of his life. And then you extrapolate forward and you're like, oh my God, they're never going to sleep. It doesn't get better. It just gets different. And you get maybe better at handling right now. But there's always going to be something different that you have to work through. And I think being open to change, because what you resist persists. If you keep fighting it, it persists. And that was a struggle that I had when I first had my oldest 7 years ago, is you've got this demanding child in the middle of the night that wants to wake up and wants to eat. And it really doesn't matter what you want. And so I think the sooner you can kind of just roll with it. There was a student, Megan Mitchell, she was on, she's at University of Maryland. She had something on Twitter the other day, and she's like, I realized that, I'm trying to be perfection coming out of PT school and on my exams, and I don't know if that's the best idea.
No.
No. My days sometimes are a hot mess. Like this morning, hot mess. But I don't have time to it is what it is, and try and be as present with what you're doing at the time, and you keep going. And I think the sooner you can kind of figure that piece out, probably the better.
Yeah. And, I was on a call with one of my mentors the other night, Chris Winfield, and someone asked him, he's like super connector or media personality. And someone had asked him a question about their message, and it's not perfect and it's not this. And, you said you were a hot mess this morning, which I highly doubt, but I'll take your word for it. But what he said that was very memorable to me is that your mess becomes your message. And I think that's exactly what the Mama Kate Mafia, your mess of how do I handle the kids and the this and the that. So that mess then became your message. And I think it's really important for people to remember that. And it's really important for people to remember that, they're seeing us on social media and we're celebrating our wins, which is awesome. And you should always do that and always celebrate your wins and let people celebrate them with you, which reminds me, I have to do that in the Women in PT group, actually. Because it's in this group that Chris Winfield runs every Friday. He's like, what were your wins? Give me your wins. And then when you write them out, you're like, well, I did more than I thought I was going to do this week. And then, so these are your wins this week. What are your plans for next week? So it keeps you accountable, but also allows you to look back and say, oh my God, look at all I did this week. And some of the wins could be like, I don't know, I cleaned my apartment, or it doesn't have to be grand wins. It's not like you won the Nobel Prize or anything. And if you did, awesome.
Right.
But I think it's important to look back at those wins in the week and where you're going to go. And also looking back on, if my life was a hot mess, how can I take that, whatever your morning was this morning, and educate others on how I got through this hot mess, or how I just dealt with it, or how I was present in it. Well, and I think it's important.
I think you're totally on point there. And wins, again, it's really tough in this day and age. I sound like an old mom now, but trying to keep up with social media, because everybody's got their gorgeous, amazing kids and their, amazing
everybody's perfect.
Photos. Oh, everybody's perfect. My dinner was off of Pinterest and blah, blah. So, that's one of the beauties, though, I think of Mama Kate Mafia, is just acknowledging. We're on a text group, and that morning where you realize 5 minutes before you walk out the door that your kid has lice, and every single mom cringes and has a silent scream when you hear that word, and you realize 5 minutes before, and you're like, all right, well, what are we going to do here? And the fact that we get through it, and somebody else has been there and understands it, and that goes back to ultimately that tribe mentality. Your win may not look like Pinterest. Your win may be, I got to my podcast interview on time, and dry shampoo is the best thing ever, and that's my win for today. But the fact that you're not alone in this, and I think having some vulnerability to say, yes, I do all these things, but it's far from perfect, but I'm kind of okay with that, because I know you guys are kind of in the boat too. So that vulnerability to be human, I think.
Absolutely. And yes, Howie, he said, easy to think you are losing if you don't reflect on your winning.
That's a great point. I literally had a
true.
Today we were talking through, and she's got an older kid, and really kind of concerned about next year, the kid going off to college and what's she going to do, and we talked about that morning gratitude and that evening gratitude, and I know I am better when I write it down. And it may be as simple as I got a shower today. It may be as simple as the kids didn't die today and I didn't have to wrap my daughter in bubble tape. It could be as simple as that. But acknowledging those wins, That's a really great point in writing it, because it makes it real.
Yes, if you write it down, it makes it real. And like, I just write 3 things like at the end of the day. And sometimes it's like, I am thankful for snow boots. Simple. You know, it doesn't have to be huge. And like for the past 2 days, I was really thankful that I had snow boots, because then I don't show up at my patient's apartment like a hot mess with wet feet and being gross and going into their, you know, beautiful apartments looking like, you know, I just walked out of a river or something, you know.
Exactly.
So it doesn't have to be these big, huge, grand things. Like, I'm thankful for my partner. I'm thankful for, it could just be like, thank God I have snow boots. And then you realize all these little things that you have and how fortunate you are.
Yeah. And I think when you're going back and, you know, to talk about kind of how I got to this point, it's not these big, magnificent steps to get here. It's little ones that when you look back, added up to something big. It's the little gratitudes that if you don't acknowledge them, you know, they tend to go unnoticed. And the things that I think for me that I've had to do a much better job on too is, so for example, my husband has been an amazing support system, and it's little things. It's not grandiose stuff. It's like, he hangs my sign, he hangs stuff on my wall. He, you know, took the kids to school so I could run down to the county offices yesterday morning before my patient. Like, remembering that it's not about me, it's everybody around me that makes this happen. I didn't get to CSM by myself. It was my neighbors and my students and our nanny and my mother-in-law and my husband. It's surrounding yourself with people that, and remembering it's those people that get you where you are. So
absolutely,
that's a big gratitude point.
On that, what I'd like to end with are maybe 2 or 3 things that you want the listeners to take away from the conversation today.
Sure. I think you don't have to know exactly what the ending looks like, but you need to know it's time to change and start to explore it. Be open to exploring it. You may not know what the ending is going to be like or what it's going to look like eventually, but be open to starting to explore it. The other is not to put limits on yourself. That whole just thing, I'm just a mom and I just work part-time, that doesn't cut it anymore, I don't think. You have so much to offer and so much to give, and be aware of all the skill sets that you have to multitask and organize, and those are things that people want. So not to make sure that you give yourself credit. And then probably the last piece is what we just touched on, is take those moments to pause and be present, and, you know, really just kind of walk around it and say, gosh, you know, this is all right. This is pretty good. I did a good job. I've got some amazing support around me, and acknowledge it, because if you don't, before you know it, gosh, it's going to be gone. It's the same thing with your kids. Before you know it, they're going to be grown up. So those are probably the 3 biggest things.
Well, I think they are a perfect way to end. And if anyone wants to get in touch with you, how can they do it?
So my website is just my name, carriepagliano.com. Perfect. So it's that's the easiest way to get to me. On Twitter, I'm CJ_Pagliano PT. And I'm also on Instagram as at Carrie Pagliano.
Perfect. Very easy for everyone to remember. So
trying to be.
Yes. So thank you, Carrie, for taking the time out in the middle of your day and coming on. And thanks to everyone for being on with us, Jennifer, Alex, Howie, Niels, a couple other people. Thank you so much, Em. And we will, I hope, Maureen, thank you so much for tuning in. Have a great week, everyone, and stay healthy, wealthy, and smart.